All right, we are recording. It is November 29. I've said this before, but this time I think we have a fairly light agenda. I think this will be a relatively quick meeting, but I've been wrong before too. So we'll see. But I don't think we have too much to cover. The first thing I want to throw out is cancellations for our next round of holidays, Christmas, New Year's, whatever else in that time frame. For us at Google, I know that we are going to be out of office on December 27 and January 3. I feel like those are going to be pretty common dates for others to be unavailable. So I'm recommending canceling the meetings on those days. I don't know if anyone else has other dates that suggest that, there probably won't be many people. Those seem like the most obvious ones to cancel at least. Anyone actually planning on being around or would like to meet on either of those days? Cool. All right. I will take silence as consensus on these then. I'll go ahead and cancel these and send a note out as well. Cool. All right. So the next one is this experimental CRD and rewrite PR, which, apologies, this is absolutely massive in scope, but thank you to everyone who's taken the time to review this. I don't think there's that much controversial in here. I want to highlight just what this looks like now. When we're adding an experimental field, well, it looks like this. Instead of a plus tag, we get these other fun brackets. It works roughly. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it's, as you would expect, something that is very easy to change in the future because it's not really an API change. It's just a structure for us of how we compile our CRDs, and that's it. So based on that, I think this is fairly straightforward. I wanted to call out one thing that Harry had mentioned in the review. This had not come up in the gap, but I thought it was worth some discussion. Basically, the way I'd originally proposed prefix match as a path modification is that it would replace the prefix, the prefix match with whatever was in the substitution. And the substitution default value was an empty string. So by default, what would happen is if you had replace prefix match and the prefix match was /foo, that would get replaced with nothing. So if your path was /foo bar, it would just be modified to /bar. Harry pointed out, I think it's a good point, is that may not feel very intuitive. That may lead to surprises. I haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but I had enough time to think that I realized we probably needed a bit more discussion on this one. So yeah, this is just throwing this out there. Does anyone have an opinion on what we should do here? Do you like the idea of a remove prefix match alternative here? Or do you think the existing replace mechanics are sufficient with the idea that replace with empty string is effectively remove?
I feel like replace with empty string being remove is a common enough pattern in general search and replace things that doesn't feel too awkward in that sense. I think Harry has a point that that having the empty value be meaningful can cause problems in Cube. So maybe we would want to consider, do we care about the distinction between empty but present and not present at all? I'd say in this case, probably not. So we don't need to use a pointer type, but that would be the other question that I would ask here is, if we have having the empty value be meaningful means that, it affects like mid empty and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, and I think one key point here, and I do need to confirm this, but my understanding of how this works is because this is not a pointer, is not a mid empty, a value would be required here. I could be wrong, but I think you would actually need to specify some, well, maybe not. I'll need to test that out, but to me, it feels at least slightly better if you need to specify an empty string value here, as opposed to just leaving it completely out. I'm not sure what is actually required here, how this is interpreted.
How would the system know the difference?
Yeah, good point. So if this really is just empty, unset, unspecified, that is unfortunately unclear.
Although, is it unclear?
I mean, it feels like for UX, you'd want to have the distinction between set and unset, so that if you just don't set it, like, it's weird. But if you make a mistake and then your stuff is being removed, and that's surprising. Like, you actually having it that you actually need to set it and specifically set it to empty feels like more natural, but it's pretty convoluted. And at that point, it feels like maybe the extra type is probably better.
Yeah, I hate to even suggest this, but it's almost like if we could, you could use a pointer type kind of thing without, pointer type omit empty, and then use webhook validation to ensure that the value is actually set and not empty. But that feels like a real, you're really stretching the bounds of this. Or go ahead.
Are we afraid that people, because the meaning is unambiguous. And in fact, if you look at how people use said, like, people do this. So is it a lot of, because adding like the optional type, and then now you have, like, what if you had it, but you optionally specified it, and versus, it feels like we're trying to protect something that probably doesn't need the additional complexity.
That's fair. If you say replace prefix match, and you just don't specify anything to replace it to, that is, as you're saying, not that weird that it just doesn't get replaced with anything.
It's replaced with the empty string.
Right. Okay.
I feel like that'd be okay as long as we call it out, right? Like, it just needs to be called. But if you don't specify this, then this is what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let me add a comment here. I think that's reasonable. Obviously, this is something that made it through the gap as well as is, so it's probably not too far out there as it is. Yeah, I'll run with that. Okay. I'll respond in here. If anyone else wants to add thoughts too, this is 9:45. Yeah, okay. That's the only thing I'm working on, resolving a couple more comments. I resolved most of them a bit earlier this afternoon, but hopefully we can get this one in soon. This is a large enough PR, and it restructures enough of the code gen that it's probably going to conflict with anything else of substance. So hoping to get this in relatively soon, and we can move from there. Okay. That's it for this one. The next major thing I wanted to discuss. Oh, Jeff, you have a doc. Let's go straight there. And maybe Jeff, do you want to present what you've been thinking about here?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been rapidly typing here. So this is not nearly complete, as you'll see, because you don't have to go very far down to hit the end of this. But I wanted to start getting down to some of the thoughts. And so the basic approach that I'm proposing is that when you've got a route, so let's say an HTTP route, we've got your match conditions, and so you say you've got a backend ref. That backend ref could optionally be, instead of the name of a service, it could be another HTTP route. This means that we don't have to have special types of routes for a parent-child type relationship here. It means we can do things like header manipulation or path manipulation at either the parent or the child route. It would require some things to be made so that some parameters could not be specified in both the parent and a child route, and that would be I'm blanking on the name, the term. When the configs are actually read, that would be a validation point to make sure that a parent and a child didn't both specify like something that's incompatible, basically. And I apologize that I haven't gotten much further than this.
No,
I spent lots and lots of time thinking about it and less time writing it down. So I think some of the things I wanted to avoid is trying to make additional types of routes. So, like an HTTP parent or a HTTP child route, and avoid the limitation of trying to say that, you can only do these things in a parent or only do these things in a child, and trying to keep relatively in sync between the two types, parent and child. So, could you, how do you, if you got like SNI settings, just to pick something, SNI match such a condition in a parent and a child. Obviously, we'd exclude those, but if we have different types of routes, then every time we add something like path rewrite, we have to add it to both types of routes in the specification. Trying to keep it simple from that point of view, the users don't have to learn 2 different types or 3 different types of routes. The complexity is put on the burden of the implementers.
Yeah, I do like that, exploring that avenue, because, for example, Kubernetes Federation is, for those of you who still remember it, was an attempt to basically say, well, yeah, like the federated version is just the same, right? And then it turns out like just applying that sort of broad brush on everything, there's just going to be tons of fields. Well, actually, in this case, it doesn't work, and we have to like add tons of asterisks after every API doc.
Yeah, that. So one thing I wanted to ask here is, if we, we've looked at various places we could add this reference, but I think this is already making a couple decisions, right? It's proposing that routes, when I've described this in the past, I've really described this as either route inclusion or delegation. And I think what you're describing is very clearly route inclusion. And that's, or at least what I've thought of as route inclusion. And that's really just a direct reference from a parent route to a child route. And the delegation side might be that a parent route just says, I trust routes in this namespace to attach to me. So the kind of the looser relationship that we have from gateway to route kind of thing. So what I think you're describing here is very much the route inclusion aspect. What I'm a little curious about is you mentioned that you were going to, that this would be in the form of a backend ref. Now, backend ref includes weight. Is that something that just would not be possible or valid when including a route? Or could you do could you make weight meaningful in that case?
that one specific thing I haven't looked at with the different, different underlying proxies, what would be workable there on that specific thing. In theory, yes, you could. I just don't know if we could actually do it, like with Envoy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a pretty. I like the proposal because it's straightforward, but I think one of the things that I have found through a couple of years of doing this sort of thing is that the details here can really trip you up, like things like the weight, but also because you're on a backend ref, you've got the match conditions and you've got the filter chains and stuff like that as well available or required. And so the behavior that we've got to define as part of this is then what happens to the filter chains. The filter chains get executed. So this one is very, as Rob said, this one is very clearly an include. Like you're essentially saying, include this specific route and put it in here pretty much. And then it feels to me like the expectation would be that match conditions, route filter chains, all that sort of stuff would sort of wrap the included route. So that and that would be the case for other route types as well. Like if they have extension points like that they would wrap the included one, and then the included one, the thing that that's exactly like what we do with HTTP proxy and Contour. The thing that we've noticed there is then you have a decision to make about for the included thing. If say the included route has prefix rewrites, and I'm doing an example here, how do you make sure that the prefix route, the included route rewrites matches the prefix that it gets given the fact that there's like a prefix that you might have a prefix rewrite or a prefix match coming from containing the parent route. And so there's a lot of really finicky detail there that has big knock-on effects that flow back up the design. And so I think this is one where for this one, like you really need to have some use cases for what we're trying to achieve with inclusion in this case. But I do think it's really important, as Rob said, that we need to talk a little bit about the delegation case, because the inclusion case is easier to define from us as being the not just implementers, but also the spec definers, but it's less useful for the end user. The delegation case is more useful because, as Rob said, it's more flexible. And one of the biggest complaints that we've had with HTTP proxy and Contour is that it's not flexible enough, that you have to, because there's a one-to-one relationship between the parent and the child, and it's a named relationship, you can't sort of have things sort of magically work. And that's one of the things that people definitely want about that sort of thing is some level of magic. How much is the level of magic? That's the really hard part to define. But like we need to have something in here that available in the eventual API. I'm not saying this isn't a good place to start necessarily. I'm saying we need to have something available in the eventual API that handles the sort of the what I call the self-service use case, the thing where people want to be able to say, include a route in a Helm chart, and have it fit into something somehow, and have that, or include a route object with an application install and have it just magically plug into some upstream infrastructure. We do that already with the gateway thing, but people want to be able to do that with the route thing as well, so that you can say, I don't care about the FQDN, but I'll mount this under whatever FQDN I've got, but here's the prefix that I want to match, or something like that. There's a few other cases there as well. So sorry, I could talk for a long time.
No, that's right. So the way I was going to address delegation is a couple of different approaches. One is by basically using namespace. So you could say, the backend ref is any routes that match a label from namespace foo. So you could have the ability to, you wouldn't have to, as the owner of the parent route, you wouldn't necessarily have to define the name of a specific child route, but you could delegate it to a namespace. And that namespace, a route in that namespace would specify, its parent ref would point to this, this parent route.
Yeah, that's definitely like the delegation one that Rob and I talked about, right, Rob?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of, I hadn't thought of doing it that specific way before, but I do like the idea of parent ref on child route ref, the parent ref on the child route referencing the parent, like that. That seems like a very natural way and kind of very much in line with hierarchy that we have used elsewhere in the API. Yeah, and I'd echo Nick's comments here of delegation being a common feature request and something like that. I think we should try to have a good answer for as much as possible. Now, I think I may have misunderstood the other part of what you were saying there, but I think what you were saying is the backend ref would basically, it could leave a name off, is what you're saying. So instead of including a specific route by name, it could just, the name would be optional.
Right.
And if the name is unspecified, then what you're doing is you're looking at the parent refs of routes in that namespace, and any route in that namespace that tries to attach there can. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so I just pasted in right there at the bottom. So this is a direct cut and paste from one of our pages on our website. Our meaning the Gateway API website. And see here how we're listeners, we're doing allowed routes, namespaces from and selector match labels. I was thinking of basically doing the same kind of thing under the backend ref in order to specify the routes that would be allowed to connect to this route, basically.
Okay, I see. I think, from my perspective, if we get into this level of complexity, I think we're talking about something that is no longer a backend ref. And I think that's fine, but I think it may justify its own struct. Basically, it's basically an allowed route struct instead of a backend ref struct or a delegate routes, or some other kind of struct like thing. That is, yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I can see how that would make sense. Yeah.
Cool.
Feels like we could almost use the exact same struct because it's going to be doing exactly the same thing. And I think that feels like a really great like isomorphism in the API that if your gateways can allow routes to attach them, but routes can allow routes to attach them as well. And you use exactly the same mechanism to do both of those things. You have the same behavior that we worked out painstakingly with the reference policy and the cross namespace stuff and the all of that sort of stuff, and we get all of that effectively for free.
Yeah, that was my thinking, is trying to basically replicate as much as possible what we've already done.
So I think I'm actually well in favor of that as well. I think that's really good. I think the reference policy mechanism we have means that you can securely do this across namespaces. And like I said, because it's isomorphic to another part of the API, once you understand the gateway route interaction, you understand the route interaction, the route parent and child interaction. The thing that I think we just need to be careful about here is that then as part of that, if we choose to do that, we have to be very specific in defining what the parent-child relationship means and what happens to the matches and filter chains and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the important things that we found in HTTP proxy is that HTTP proxy was a like a second stage design. It was a reaction to, we designed an ingress route object that was like itself a reaction to ingress. And one of the things that we did in ingress route was that when you do the parent-child relationship, you didn't have to the match criteria for the routes didn't propagate down to the children. What that means is that the children need to know where they will be mounted in the parent, and they need to know, like, the prefix is the best example here. You can't say, I want to take all routes from namespace blog and put them under the prefix blog. What you have to do in that case is you can say, I allow all routes from namespace blog, but then you have to tell the people in namespace blog, well, all of your things have to have the prefix blog, or else they'll be rejected, or something like that. And so that's the big choice you're going to make, is do you wrap the things that you're delegating to or not? And either way is kind of acceptable, but it has trade-offs.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like at least a couple of you think that it would be better to create a different struct than modify the backend ref.
Yeah, I'm +1 on that.
Yeah, that would be my preference.
Okay. I can incorporate that. As again, I apologize for not getting this as well written out as I intended to, but I'll definitely have it more put together next week. Other feedback on this? Or other questions about how I was thinking of dealing with anything?
And thanks for getting this in. It's good to just even get the discussion rolling here. I think that the thing that's been telling to me in this brief discussion we've had so far is that it seems like there's pretty broad support for basically supporting the more complex option, which is route delegation instead of just route inclusion.
Right.
And that's been helpful to hear. I think we'll just need to be.
Can I ask a question there, Rob, though?
Yeah.
It's kind of been only a few of us talking. I would like to throw the floor open before we go too far in that to say, everyone else who's listening here, you're all, a lot of you are implementers, or does anyone have thoughts about the idea of doing this delegation idea versus doing the inclusion idea, the more flexible option? I'll probably take silence as we agree with you, but just wanted to give you all the chance.
Just to be clear too, as I was trying to figure out what to propose, delegation was actually a major driver of it, of my thinking actually. It's that and specified in what I've written yet. That's really the reason for having reusing basically routes as the child object, if you will, so that an app team can own their route, and make what if they need to change headers because they need to insert a label for canary testing or blue green or whatever, they could do that without having to involve the higher level admin.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really important to consider is how far deep do you go? How far deep do you allow people to do the delegation? Do you allow an arbitrary level of nesting of routes or not?
Yeah,
and probably not. But
and here I specified specifically a route can be a parent or a child, but not both.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so it's only one layer. That's good.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. I know you say that pretty clearly, that route can be a parent or child, but not both. But one weird thing is for that route in the middle, a parent route, because we're using parent refs, that parent route is still going to be the child of a gateway, which all makes sense, but we'll just have to be like super clear in our documentation or whatever that you can, the parent route is still a child of a gateway usually, right, or set of gateways.
Yeah. So another way to look at it is if the parent route of a route is a route, then it can't have it can't delegate to another route.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I'm thinking about here, when we have the parent ref upwards to a route, so you have a child ref that's pointing up to a parent route. How do we know where that attaches to? Like, routes are similarly complex to gateways in a way, in that there are multiple rules. So not multiple listeners, but multiple rules. Do we need the same kind of section name concept here, where we, point up at a specific rule name and here's where I want to attach to? Or is there a better way to represent that?
I was thinking it would work just like it does today with backend ref. I mean, you'd match on a certain condition and that would point to a backend ref. Match on a different condition and that might point to a different backend ref. Same thing here.
So the parent ref would point to a specific backend ref, or
so the parent route. So you'd have match conditions, and so when certain condition matches, like maybe the DNS subdomain or the host name would match, and that would point to in this case, a child route instead of a backend ref.
Yep, but then I think what Rob was talking about is on the child route side, the parent ref, just right now, that can only, would that reference just the whole object of the parent route object, or would it reference some subsection of the parent route object?
No, I would think it simply reference the parent route itself.
Yep. So I guess, yeah, again, this is one of those things where doing that then means that you can't have the same child route mounted in multiple places under multiple conditions in the parent route. And this is what I mean by stuff gets so fiddly so fast, because you've got to make a lot of decisions very quickly that then have big flow-on effects.
I guess I don't see why you couldn't have a child route referenced in multiple places in the parent route.
So you could, but there's no way for the child route to say, the child route is then saying, please, you can use me at any places you want to, not you can only use me at this specific place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my assumption here is that you've got different owners of the parent route, and so they may be changing how they're getting to certain decision points, and so that's why you just want the child to point to that parent in general, and not to a specific match criteria or something.
Yeah,
so you go, Rob.
Yeah, so I wanted to pull this up so we're all looking at the same thing here. But the parent ref that we have right now on routes, that so far, as far as I know, only points at gateways. It has everything you'd expect. It has group, kind, namespace, and name. But it also has section name. And that section name is for saying, I want to attach to this specific listener. So listener 80. Listener, HTTP or whatever the listener name is. I don't know. What I am curious about is if we need a similar concept here, if there is a route that has, say, 5 rules and you want to attach to just one of those, do you need should we add an entry basically right here that says route rule name, or that's and this is probably getting too far into the details, but I'm just, because routes have rules and you kind of have that, set of multiple places you could potentially attach to, we need some way to solve that. I don't know that we need to have the exact solution figured out today in this meeting, but that's just something that immediately comes to mind if we're using parent ref as our way to point up to a parent route.
So my thinking was no, as far as needing to point to a specific section of the parent route, because that means that if I'm the owner of the parent route, I have to, if I want to make any changes that might affect that section, I have to coordinate with all any child route owners. So it kind of creates a restriction that I think is I don't think you get that great of a benefit for the restriction.
Now that's a good point. I think it's good for me to understand, or be helpful for me to understand, the common delegation use case here. So when I think of delegation for routes, what I think of is I want to delegate every request to example.com/foo to the foo namespace, right? And the way I want to do that is I want to have a route in the bar, in another namespace, a parent route basically that matches all requests with path prefix foo and delegates them to the foo namespace. If that same, I guess, well, let me stop there and say, does the route in the foo namespace need to be aware of that /foo prefix, or could it just route regardless of prefix? Like, would it route on /bar and then are those prefixes kind of joined together, or does the route in the foo namespace need to be aware of the parent route path?
So that's kind of part why I kind of liked the using the same, the like HP route for both parent and child, because if I want to make it so that the child route isn't aware of the path that it's, the request is originally coming from, it can do a rewrite to rewrite that path. So it takes the foo off the beginning of it. If the path is foo/foo/bar, you just take off the /foo. So if another route is referencing, another parent route is referencing that same child route, but it's /moo/bar.
Right.
You can do it there. If you want to do the rewriting at the child route, you could do it there too, or instead. So it provides flexibility based off of how your organization works and how you want to handle the delegation and inclusion, delegation/inclusion. You define where you're doing that. You can do it do matching at the top, or you can do cleaning up headers, or whether that means inserting them or removing them at the parent level, or you can do that or do that at the child level.
That's an interesting point, and this comes right back to, I think, a point Nick had added earlier, right? I think, Nick, you had mentioned that you have to be very careful about what you allow at multiple levels. Like for example, you specifically mentioned rewriting, and I think at least some proxy implementations are going to be unable to basically add a level of rewriting before a level of before a secondary level of routing, basically, right? Like for some implementations, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to merge all this config together and then just kind of run with it. Like, you might not have control when the rewrite happens.
Yeah, you'd have to create your rules for the proxy itself in a way that would, you'd have to translate them from the parent and child configs into a uniform config that would handle the traffic in a single pass.
Yeah.
So without question, this model puts the burden on the implementer.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say before is that it also puts I like this model, to be clear. Yeah, there is a lot of work that we will need to do to be very specific about the expected behavior of the API and say that for example, that maybe we want to say filters from the parent and filters from the child both run. If the filters are incompatible, then the route can be rejected or something like that. Like,
right.
Yeah, you just need to be very specific about the rules and say, this happens and this happens and this happens. And then the thing that I think we've missed a little bit in the past, but we really need to make sure that we write out how the status works here, because I think that the writing out how the status works and the status flow works is what ensures that the model is consistent. When you have a status flow that doesn't work, that almost always says that you've missed something in what the API is actually doing. And so what I'm saying here is I feel like what we need to do for this is, like, you've got the sort of the base proposal here, Jeff, and I think what we need to do is do the base proposal, and then we need to sit down with and be like, here's 7 use cases or something like that. Like, you're doing a delegated route. Here's how path rewrite can work. Here's how adding headers. Here's how header manipulation can work. And just a few of the different filtering options. You've got that previous doc that we did about the request filtering between gateways and namespace routes. Like, there's a bunch of similar issues, and we need to run through a bunch of things. And I think having like a set of like standard use cases that we figure out how to do in each thing that we talk about proposing, and that way you can understand what the trade-offs are under each of those use cases. And then ideally, those use cases become tests later on down the track, right? But those are the use cases that we use to define how the API fits together now. And that way we can have everyone sort of make sure that we haven't missed some use cases. I know that there are people with HTTP proxy who wanted to be able to do stuff like the child route contains the TLS details, like, which is weird, right? Like, but that's something that people absolutely, the people want to be able to have it be that there's some way for you to supply the TLS detail all the way back up to the gateway. And people definitely want a way to do that. People want that to be able to do magic. And so I want to be able to put a line in there that says, figure out something about TLS, basically. So I think that feels like the next place to go to me.
So I'll put in this document, I'll write up a number of the different use cases that we've talked about, which I'm familiar with as well, and finish fleshing out the what the proposal is, and hopefully next week, if we don't have anything else more pressing, we can go over this in more detail. I'll try to get this. Let me look at my schedule here real quick. Maybe Thursday before I get it finished, looking at my schedule. But I'll try to get it done, before the end of the week, so we could have time to look at it Monday at US time.
That sounds good.
Before the meeting.
Yeah,
great. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you again for taking this one on. I know it's kind of a big topic, but I'm looking forward to continuing discussion around this. And I think we're off to a good start here.
Great.
I should say as well, Jeff, offers on the table as well if you want to do a sidebar Zoom or something like that as you're writing to talk about this stuff. As you can no doubt tell, like, I've also spent a lot of time thinking about this. So if you want to shortcut some rounds of feedback with a pairing or something like that over the document, then 100% fine with that.
Yeah, and I took the notes you'd written up for me, Nick, and I definitely included that as part of my thinking on this. So
yeah, sure.
All right. Well,
cool.
We don't have a lot of time left, but so thanks everybody for the feedback, and I'll get this more refined for next week.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you. Thanks a bunch. The last thing I wanted to cover here is just PR and issue triage. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot going on here. I took a look at issues other than things that we've just kind of revive by, removing a stale life cycle kind of thing. I don't think we have anything very recent that needs to go on other than, life cycle issues. Feel free to correct me if I've missed anything recent that we need to discuss. And I think the story is very similar for pull requests. The one thing that I think, Chrismar, you're working on this filter type consistency. I haven't looked too recently, but I know there were some comments still to be resolved, but it looks awfully close.
Yep.
Cool. And this one, we've already covered this. And Shane, you've got the L4 traffic matching. I know you've been out for a bit, but I think this is still moving. You don't need any feedback from us at this point in time, right? Actually, I don't even.
No, I've got feedback that I still need to kind of go over, but I just got back from vacation.
Cool. All right. Well, that sounds good. I think that's everything we have. So if anyone has anything else, feel free to add it now, or we can have our 10 minutes back.
Sounds good to me.
Cheers.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, everybody.